Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 1, Episode 1, The Inked, with Reilly Smith. Hello, everyone, and welcome for the first time to the Inked podcast. I'm Reilly Smith. I'm the host of The Inked, and today we are doing an overview of what The Inked is, who I am as its host, and so much more. But first of all, I want to thank you guys for being here for our very first episode. I am so glad to finally be getting this podcast off the ground. But joining me today for this episode of the podcast is Mr. James Summers, who is going to be hosting for us today. He's going to be asking me some questions about the podcast. So, how are you doing today, James?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm really excited, obviously. I'm good to go. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to James so that he can host for this episode of the podcast. So, James, take it away.
Okay, 100%. Let's do it. Okay, time to kick off the Q&A with the host of the Inked. Let's go ahead and start with our first question, which is, Reilly, what is the reason for the Inked podcast's name?
So this is one of my favorite questions. I love this question so much because this name is so near and dear to my heart. But the name was based off of the Oxford Inklings, which were obviously C.S. Lewis and Tolkien and some of their friends who started a writing group back when they were working and going to Oxford. And so it was really cool to get to study them and read about them. And then I eventually started my own writers group that we called the Inklings. It was me, it was like some of my really close friends, like my cousin and my family members. And we had this writers group and we loved this writers group. And one day there was like a joke that my cousin made. He was like, wouldn't it be funny if we had a podcast? And so I was like, oh, that would be funny. So like 2 years later, here we are. And I was like, okay, I want to name it The Inked after the Inklings from way back when.
Yeah, I love that. That's a good group, and it's nice to have names that have meaning behind them instead of just I came up with this because I thought it sounded pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you've kind of already answered this question a little bit, but let's go into a little bit more detail on what made you want to create the Inked podcast.
So yeah, like I said, it was a random joke my cousin made at one of our Inklings meetings. He was just like, wouldn't it be funny if we had a podcast? And I was like, it really would be. But the biggest reason that I wanted to was because in our Inklings meetings back then, when we were talking in like an open space where anyone could hear us, like we used to have like a little room in our library that we would sit in and there would be nobody around. But eventually we weren't able to get that room anymore. And so we just started meeting at like random tables in the library or like random like spaces. And so when we did that, people would actually listen to like what we were saying. And I learned a lot of the time we had really like creative, fun discussions about writing. And so I was like, this is really cool. This is a great community. This is a great thing. And so I was like, I feel like the podcast would be a great idea just for young writers to come together and just talk about writing.
Yeah, I agree that's good because honestly, a lot of people need a lot of help on things they don't understand too.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of fulfills two different functions. Our third question is why is the Inked podcast motto spill some ink and embrace the story?
So this, I'm so proud of this motto. This is my pride and joy when it comes to stuff involving the Inked podcast. And it is really a two-part answer. So there's spill some ink and there's embrace the story. Spill some ink means essentially, it has a two-part meaning is what I'm saying. Spill some ink means essentially write, because that is the biggest part of being a writer, obviously, is writing. And so often as writers we question ourselves. We're like, okay, I'm messy, this is not working out right, this doesn't sound right. And so it makes me think of like spilled ink. Just spill the ink on the page and fix it later type thing. So like just get your writing on the page, get it out there, and like just go for it. And then, as far as the embrace the story part of our motto, the reason that I say embrace the story is because, like I said, we question so often. We're like, this story sucks, or this story is amazing, and you're fighting yourself on whether you like it or not. And so when I say embrace the story, I mean take all of that story. Those broken pieces, those pieces that you love, these characters that are damaged because maybe you're damaged, or like these villains that have issues but are also really relatable, or like these heroes that aren't perfect or are perfect. Like, whatever, take all of that and just embrace it for what it is. Because maybe it's your first story, or maybe it's like your 50th story. Like, whatever, it is what it is. So just spill some ink, write it out, get it out there, and embrace it when you're done. Just know that it's your story. So no matter if you think it's good or bad, it's you on a page, and it should be important to you.
Yeah, you're right. And the part about embracing the story is also so important. Just like that, I saying, if you don't embrace your story, then nobody else will either. If you don't like what you're writing, then you're not going to be able to transform that into a love that your readers will have for your writing. So that's just something else. My 2 cents of mediocre wisdom from James today. So our fourth question is, what is the mission of the Inked podcast?
So I talked about this a little bit before, but the mission of the Inked podcast is just to build a community and like a safe space for young writers, and even if you're an old writer and you come to us, basically writers in general. It's made by writers for writers to talk about all things writing and all things reading, and just to really get into everything that we talked about, the good, the bad, the messy. It's embracing all of these things in writing. um and so yeah, it's just this, it's the, like, the meaning and the reason we're here is to be that safe community and to be that safe space, and to help young writers also to get their voice out there and like help support them in their journey. So yeah, that's kind of why we're here.
That's great. So now my next question is, how does the Inked podcast function? You mentioned that mission. How does the Inked podcast function, and how does it fulfill that mission?
So the Inked podcast functions in a very structured way, and this is one thing that I've had a hard time kind of meddling with myself, is how the Inked is structured. And how it is structured is we have a little bit of something for everybody. We have blog posts, we have our YouTube channel, we have our podcast on Spotify, like we have all of that. And it's the way it functions is each season of the show, we break down another part of writing. So this first season is general writing. That's like the theme of the season, and it is just talking about the biggest parts of writing. So like whether you're a planner, a pantser, whether you outline or you don't, like whether you really like writing or you don't like writing, like etc etc. It's just helping you test the waters of all of those big portions first. And then each season after that is going to be a breakdown of a particular element. Like season 2 is a breakdown of plot. So like we have an episode for exposition, rising action, climax, etc. And yeah, so we break it down like that.
Yeah, that's a very good way to do it. So you mentioned though something. Here's a question. You mentioned that you had like a website and stuff. What does the Inked podcast do? What does it have outside of just the strict Spotify podcast? Do you have like a website, and what kind of stuff do you
So
have?
we do have a website, which is also the host platform for our blog, which our blog is each episode of the podcast basically written out in a form. So if you're a visual learner, or if you're someone who wants to have like the notes on that episode, then you can go to our blog and like there's all of that laid out for you. And then we also have our YouTube channel, which is not only the podcast itself in a more visual way with like each question lined up, but it is also a space where we, as like the team of the Inked podcast, film like sillier videos. We really have fun with it. And you just get to see all of like the ups and downs of writing. So we, like I said, we have our YouTube channel, our website, and our Spotify podcast.
Awesome. Our last question before we wrap up this section is, who are the guests on the Inked?
So the Inked podcast is guested by predominantly young writers. So, writers who may not be published yet, or they may be attempting to be published, but they're not quite there yet, or maybe they are published and they're just a young writer who's already been published at their young age. And we also, like I said, our big one of our biggest missions is to support these young writers, and so that's why we want them to come on, because despite being young and maybe not even being published yet, they have a lot to share because we have learned so much as young writers, and we want to share that knowledge with everyone. So that's kind of who guests. We also have at the end of each season of the show, we have our masterclass interviews, which are where our professional authors come on and talk about their stories or their biggest pieces of advice, etc., etc. And this season's masterclass guest is Mr. Josiah DeGraff, which I am very excited for you guys to hear. So, like I said, it's guested mostly by young writers who are either published or not published, it doesn't necessarily matter, and professional authors who have been in this industry for many years and have many great insights to share with writers of all ages.
Well, that was awesome, Riley. I really enjoyed that, and I'm sure the listeners did too. But now, cue Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, bum 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 bum. I want to know more
Oh
about
dear.
you. So I'm going to ask you a few questions about yourself as a
I
host.
guess
Are you ready?
so. I mean, no better time than the present, I guess.
Cue the evil laugh. Okay, so my first question is, how did you first find writing?
Oh gosh, this is the story that I don't like to tell, especially since my mom listens to this podcast and so does like a lot of my friends from church, and I don't necessarily like them knowing this, but I actually started writing for the first time in a church sermon at the ripe old age of like 10 or 11 years old because I was sitting there and I was really bored. Now, I was at a different church. I wasn't at the church I'm at now. But I was young, I was mad because for some reason I wasn't going to Sunday school, and I wasn't I think it was because I was at like the transitional age to where I started going to adult service instead of like the kids service. And so I was sitting there and I was very upset about it. And so I had a notebook and I just decided to write a story, and I blended a bunch of random films and books together. I blended, I think it was like Pilgrim's Progress and a bunch of other like fantasy stories. It was very interesting, and it did not turn out quite as I expected it to. But now that is still one of my favorite stories to this day. It's really messy, but it's still one of my favorites.
Ooh, I feel like we need to have a YouTube thing called Riley
Oh
Narrates Her First
gosh.
Story.
No. I barely let
Okay.
my co-author read
Matt,
that. Okay, he helped me write it. I didn't even let him read it for a really long time.
oh, I mean, I understand that too. My first stories are very interesting in with robots kidnapping people who stay in a cave for 8 years till they call out the National Guard to save them.
Oh
So
gosh.
I understand, and I can have no judgment on messy first stories. No judgment at all. I can't.
Our
I don't
first
have permission
stories
to.
are our learning curve.
Uh,
So like that's when you're learning everything. So I feel like nobody can really judge anybody's first story because everybody's first story was a learning curve. So, yeah, for sure.
yeah, mine I think was a little bit of a bigger learning curve than others. But moving on from interesting first stories, what is your favorite? Oh no, sorry. Look, I can't see correctly apparently. Our next question is, what made you want to create a small writers group?
So that was actually my mom. So I credit a lot of things that I do to my mom because truly she is one of my biggest cheerleaders, and I appreciate her so much for that. But she actually encouraged me. I was studying the Oxford Inklings for school at the time, and she actually was like, "Hey, you're studying them and you really like them, and all of your writer friends that live in the area are kind of close by. So why not just like start a writers group and find middle ground and like just do it. Like just go for it. You guys can like make food, you can talk about writing, whatever you want to do, you can do it." And so, yeah, that's kind of the biggest catalyst. Like I said, I really didn't have a lot of writer friends at the time. And so I didn't get to see them very often. And so my mom was like, you might as well make a group and you guys can grow together as writers. And so that was definitely it. I credit that to my mom 100%.
Yeah, she and you are absolutely right though. Having that small, especially group of writers to help you along can be so important because I mean I know it's helpful because I mean I'm on YWW, but besides that I have my own in-person writers group and then I have friends who write. It's so important to be able to bounce ideas off of each other, be able to ask questions, and just have people like that who actually
Mm-hmm.
care about you and that you can
Yeah.
return the favor for rather than just trying to do it on your own
Yeah,
because
for
nobody can do
sure.
it on their own. So the next question, which I accidentally tried to slip in earlier through my mess up, what is your favorite genre to write
Oh,
in?
okay. So I am. I heard this term recently from a friend, and it's called a genre mixer, and that's kind of what I am because it's so hard to pick one because I've written in almost every genre under the sun. I've written contemporary, I've written historical fiction, I've written fantasy, I've written mystery, I've written like rom-com styles. I've written so many things. And I it's so hard to pick one because I love all of them. And but I can say completely honestly, when it comes down to it, there are two that really have my heart and soul entirely because I guess I grew up reading these kind of books. And that is mystery and fantasy. Because not necessarily together, but I loved mysteries growing up. I still love mysteries to this day. I loved reading Sherlock Holmes, and I loved reading so many different. Like I read Nancy Drews and I read the Hardy Boys and all of that growing up, and so when I got older, I was like, you know what, I want to write this kind of thing, and so I did, and I love writing that kind of thing. I love the intrigue and everything. Um, but like I said, fantasy also has a very special place in my heart, and I think that's because it just lets my inner kid kind of run away with it, and like I can just do whatever I want to with
Mm,
it. And so it just, yeah, it just brings out my little inner kid, and I think it makes me really happy.
yeah, I understand that as a huge fantasy writer myself. I understand letting it run away with you. And honestly, we need more mystery fantasies. I'm gonna just go ahead and put it out there. We need more. I don't know why they're not enough. Mine is a little bit, but we need more of them. So maybe you will create the Mystera fantasy genre. Um, so talking about genre, moving on to some books. What are some current
So I
projects that you have
have,
going on?
oh gosh, I have a couple major projects right now, but my main project that is probably going to take up the most amount of time is my series called Amulets of Averon, which is based actually off that first book that we talked about earlier that I wrote when I was 10 or 11. And I just loved those characters and I loved certain aspects of that story. And so I decided to rewrite it as an older person or as an adult, and I was like, okay, I'm going to rewrite it. And I've started rewriting it and I'm falling in love with it all over again. Now, am I grimacing as I read the old story? Yes, absolutely. But that is my main one. That is Amulets of Averon. It is supposed to be a 5 book young adult series, which I am so excited about. So yeah, that's my main project right now. I have others, but they're all like projects that will never get published. Probably they're just like testing the water type projects. So I'm trying not to talk about them very much because I don't want to get people too excited about something that's probably not going to get published.
Yeah, I understand that, but who knows? Maybe they'll become
Oh
bestsellers, and you
dear.
never thought they were going to go anywhere.
Hope not. Those need to stay in
That's how it goes.
books.
So, our next to last question is: how does running the Inked podcast affect
So this
you
is
and your
something I get
life?
asked a lot actually because I am a young person. Like I'm not out of school yet. I'm graduating this year, but I'm not this coming up year. But I'm not out of school yet. So a lot of people are like, how does that affect your school schedule? Does it affect whether you're going to go to college or not, etc., etc.? And I can say 100% honestly, it doesn't affect me too badly, actually. So I take about a day out of my week and do nothing but like Inked Podcast paperwork. And having my team has been absolutely amazing. It, that's been a more recent thing, but having them has been or you guys, since James is a member of my team, but having you guys has been really amazing. And while it was really hard to like hand over the Inked podcast to somebody else, I can say I'm really glad I did it because you guys have been amazing. Y'all have been so helpful, and y'all run a lot of it now. And so, yeah, it doesn't affect me too awful much, but I do have paperwork and I do have to communicate with people. So it's a commitment for sure.
Yeah, I understand. And yeah, thank you for allowing us, and on behalf of the whole team, you allowing us to take on that capacity. I understand those things that are close to your heart can be hard to
Mm-hmm.
let somebody else help with. So our Q&A is almost at an end, regrettably. But our last question is a very important one, and that is, what is one thing that you would want all
This is
writers to
something
know?
that I will repeat over and over and over again. Well, it's two things. I have two things. Those are like two things that are very dear and near to my heart. And that is one, write every day. Do it as often as you're inspired. As like, if you get consistent with those writing habits, even when you don't feel like it, it'll make you such a big, it'll help you as grow as a person, but it'll also help you grow as a writer. One quote that I don't even know who said it, but it's one of the most important quotes. I have it everywhere, and it is, um, oh gosh, I'm gonna blank on it now. Why? Um, but it's like write every day because you can edit a bad page, but you can't edit a blank one. Or it's like yeah, that's as close as I could get at the moment. But that is the one thing I will say is just write. Even if it's bad, you can go back and edit it, but you can't edit if you don't write, if you don't get it there. So for sure, that's one of my biggest pieces of advice. My second one is love your characters and love your story. Because if you don't love your characters and you don't love your story, then how are your readers supposed to? We talked about this in future episodes. We will talk about this a lot because I record these out of order, guys. But in future episodes, we'll talk about that a lot. Where if you love your story and if you pour yourself into your story, then yes, it can be hard to let that story be read by other people, but it can also help other people fall even more in love with your characters and even more in love with your story. So that is my biggest pieces of advice.
You're absolutely true, and those are great. I especially love that quote. The I
Mm-hmm.
can edit a bad page, but I can't edit a blank one. Or like you said, something like that. That is one that's also really good whenever you feel like you
Mm-hmm.
want to write, but feel like you can't write well. Because I know I've talked to people before who have talked about, I want to write, but I just feel like
Mm-hmm.
it's wasting my time because I can't do it well. Or at least they think they
Mm-hmm.
can't do it well. We're always our worst critics. Um, but that's a great quote that can really encourage people to just go for it. And as you say, spill some ink, embrace the story, because you can't edit a blank
Mm-hmm.
page, but you can edit a bad one. Well, I think we are sadly at the end of our Q&A, and I want to thank you, Reilly, for letting me come on for
I
such
really
a
appreciate you coming on,
consequential
James, for
episode
sure.
today.
You did wonderful.
Thank you. Yes,
Well, it is
ma'am.
now time for the outro of the episode, which is where I will take it back over from James. So thank you, James, for being here. I really appreciate you coming on to host this episode of the show. And something that I will say at the
Absolutely.
end of every episode of the show is, as always, thank you to our listeners for being here, and we will see you in the next episode. Bye, guys. Footnote. Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be back on the podcast again just to tell you guys this. If you enjoyed this first episode of the show, you can find all of our platforms at our website, the www.theinkedworld.com. Like I said, you can find all of our platforms there. You can find our YouTube, our Spotify, and any other platforms we may have at the time. So thank you guys for listening to this episode, and we'll see you next time.